they're living in your home. So what a great way to teach them tax. Okay, and you say to your child, we're going to give you $10 a week, and you give them $10, or you give them $9 instead of 10. And they say, well, I thought I was supposed to get $10.
Pay the tax, man.
Well, why not deduct 10% for tax?
I love it.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm sitting here with Lorne Robinson, and he is a financial advisor, and he is a dad, and he has had some great, I just met him yesterday, but he has some great practical wisdom for us as dads to learn, and ideas for teaching our kids about budgeting and money. But not only that, giving. You talked a lot about giving, and I love that part of it. So you are involved with two ministries, I believe. Compass, give me the scoop kind of. So Kingdom Advisors and Compass. Tell me a little bit about those.
Yeah. So first of all, you're right. I'm a dad of three. We homeschooled our children. Our youngest child never went to school, and I give the credit to my good wife, Kathy, for that.
Give it where it's due.
Well, absolutely. And I always said that I was kind of like the principal. And I was just there if needed,
Right.
if and when needed,
Right.
to support. So I started out my career as a pastor, spent 24 years as a financial advisor, and then I was approached wondering if I would consider really being a pastor to advisors. And I was like, wow, that's such an interesting role, and I didn't think anything like that actually existed. But it was the merger of the two things that I had done in my life. So it seemed like a natural fit. So that's where Kingdom Advisors come in. So it's an international organization. It's out of Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm the national director for Canada. And I work and network with Christian and financial professionals across the country. And our goal is to have a Christian financial advisor available for Christians that are out there anywhere in Canada.
Right.
To be able to find a Christian advisor,
Right.
Where they can talk to somebody who has the same values or very similar values,
Right.
yeah, and a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
So we have a training course that allows an advisor to get a certified Kingdom Advisor designation. And just last year, I was approached by a ministry called Compass, which it was formerly known as Crown. In Canada. So some people
Crown, yes.
may be familiar with Crown, and it's a ministry that was founded by Howard Dayton. And he actually went through the Bible. He and another guy went through the Bible and determined that there's 2,350 verses that relates to money and possessions. So I was asked if I would head up that ministry in Canada. And I saw that as certainly a unique opportunity, because financial advisors who are Christians are really interested, if they're serious about their faith, they also see a role, a ministry opportunity in their role as well. And maybe there's an opportunity for them to lead studies or to even share in their churches about biblical financial wisdom. So it's kind of the overlap, but Compass is more of a ministry to the general public.
Sure.
So we have studies for couples. We have studies for different stages of life where an individual or a couple might be to walk through. And the goal is biblical financial wisdom and how that can be incorporated into what you do as an individual, as a business owner, or as a couple with your money. And we also do a curriculum, which is why I'm at this conference, a curriculum for high school students or homeschool students to walk through and really get a foundation of what the Bible says about money, number one, and how do you really become a financial disciple.
Right. And that's what I was sat in your talk yesterday, and the term financial disciple, I think it's such a great term. So break that down a little bit. What do you mean by a financial disciple?
Well, I do find it interesting that Jesus spoke so much about money, and he spoke more about money than he actually did about faith or prayer, even combined.
Yes.
He spoke more about money. The only thing that he spoke more about was the kingdom.
Okay.
Right? So finances is significant, and we all deal with it. So I see finances as an opportunity and a tool And because we all have to deal with it, it's really an opportunity to train others to become disciples. And it's interesting, the call of Christ, the commission to all of us is really to make disciples, right?
Yes.
He said, go and make disciples, teach everyone, teach all nations.
Yes.
So the mandate for a Christian financial advisor, and even for us as parents, is to really make disciples. And I can remember the change in my own life when I recognized as a financial advisor that my calling and what I was doing in life, what I was meant to do, was to fulfill the Great Commission in my business, in my work, in my communication with my clients.
Yes.
That I could actually make disciples.
Yes.
So then translate that to being a dad.
Yes.
It's like, okay, what's my role? It's to make my children become disciples of Christ. Ultimately, that's what it is.
Right.
Finances is a tool
Yes.
that can actually do that.
All right. So in your talk yesterday, let's talk about children now as you've gone there. You gave some great examples for budgeting with your kids, taxing your kids. You talked about taxing your kids. I loved it. Give me that example and that model you talked about, and how can we teach our kids about money and budgeting?
Yeah. So what I drew out yesterday is really that pie chart. And just to make it simple, there's only 5 things you can do with money. And ironically, we sum it up in 4 words.
Right.
But
I remember
it's live, give, owe, and grow. And they rhyme, so it's easy.
Love it.
So live is the lifestyle, and that tends to be the majority of where our money goes to support our lifestyle. The give, I think that needs to be a priority, which I tried to emphasize yesterday. And
You said yesterday that, I think you said, like, you had a conversation with a financial advisor, like, how often does giving or generosity come up? And he was like, never.
right. And if you look biblically, that's a challenge, because if we are Christians, then we need to be looking to the Bible to determine what should be our financial priorities, right? So giving, in my mind, should be the number 1 priority. And that should come first. And I think that there's a powerful message in there. The owe piece, we divide owe into owing debt, because lots of times in order to make some major purchases, we just can't do it based on current income. So we borrow to do it. But the principle around that is to avoid the use of debt where possible. So if you borrow, minimize what you borrow, negotiate a good interest rate, and get out of debt as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's really where you become a slave. And the other one, the other owe piece, is owing tax. And that tax piece obviously is significant. And for most people, unless they're self-employed, your tax is automatically deducted. It's a requirement by the law. So the government makes it our priority.
Thank you.
So they will force you to deduct. They forced an employer to deduct from your pay so that the tax is paid. So, and the other one is the grow piece, which is the savings portion. So really, what is the priority around each of those becomes significant, and I think becomes an opportunity to disciple people.
Okay, so how do we disciple our kids in those? Live, give, owe, grow. I love it.
Yeah, so here's the idea that came out of this book. Brian Holtz, who's the CEO of Compass and Financial Discipleship for Families. And he brought up an idea that I thought was quite interesting. And he said and he described that he does it for his children. Based on their age, he actually gives them, that's their pay for a week. Right? So if they're 10 years old, they get $10 per week.
Okay.
So then along comes with that is a responsibility. Okay, what do you do with this money? Right? Well, if the first priority is giving, then you set aside a certain percentage for giving. Now, as Christians, we typically lean toward the 10% for the giving. Hey, it doesn't have to be 10%. It could be 15%.
Right. It could be more.
Right? It could be more. Yeah. And traditionally, people are born savers or spenders. Right? And even you will find in marriage, one is a saver one is a spender. It's just the reality. So one is kind of born with, they're going to spend. It's a natural thing to do. And the other is born as a saver.
I heard someone say there's two people in every marriage. There's someone who wants to spend money and there's someone who doesn't like to have any fun.
Well, there you go. So that's another way to say it. That's another way to say it. Exactly. So, and the one thing that I have taken from my studies going through the Compass material is that financial discipleship is about a closer walk with the Lord, a closer relationship.
It's not
with
just
the
about
Lord.
money.
It is not about money.
It's not about money.
Money is just the tool. And the tool is meant to bring you in closer relationship with the Lord. And honestly, if I had to, set aside what's different about Compass, that is the difference, is the goal. And Brian actually says in this book, it's not about money.
Right.
It's about discipleship.
Right.
And the ultimate goal for us as parents is really to be a discipler of our children.
Yes.
Right? Finances are just a tool to do that.
Right.
So from the practical standpoint, if you're giving them an allowance or having them work for this, which I think is a good idea, then it's kind of, I've thought about the idea of taking this pie chart, and I have done it as an adult. I do it every year around tax time, because around tax time, you can actually figure out where that money goes. And a lot of it is on your tax.
The actual percentages of all the stuff.
How much you give. I mean, if you're giving to a charity, it's on your tax return.
Yeah.
Right? If you're saving in an RRSP, that's also on your tax return. Typically, people know what they're saving anyway. You can easily calculate how much is going to debt, right? And when your taxes are done, you know how much you paid at the end of the year, right? So it's all there. And whatever is left, where does it go?
Right.
It's going to your lifestyle.
Right.
Right? So this is in my opinion, it's a great idea to do. And I've started to do it every year because it brings in accountability. And I calculate it every year and I show it to Kathy.
Right.
How are we doing? Right? And my goal is to increase. I have set a goal to increase my giving by 1% a year.
That's so great.
Right?
It's great that you do it, and it's great that you can track it. You got to do your taxes anyways.
Right.
And that you're wanting to move ahead with that, with giving and grow your giving. That's a great reminder for all of us.
Because the typical answer, when you ask people how much should you give, is 10%.
Yes.
You always get that answer, 10%.
Yes.
But what challenged me in doing some of the study around financial discipleship is where your treasure is, Jesus said, there your heart will be. So your heart follows where your treasure goes. And here's what was challenging to me. If you're saving more than you're giving, your heart goes there. So I look at the giving as giving to God.
Right.
Because ultimately it all belongs to God.
Yeah.
If you consider it, that's the foundation.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's what changes the financial picture for people when they understand that everything they have was given by God and God is the owner. So what does the owner desire us to do with what he's given to us? Right?
That's a great question. What does the owner require us to? It's all his anyways.
It's all his.
What does the owner require us?
Yeah, and I mean, typically what we do is, okay, we have this money, and I've heard it so many times. Okay, 10% is God's.
Yep.
And okay, I can do with whatever I want with the rest.
It's a 90.
Because that's mine. Right? That's not biblical. What's biblical is 100% belongs to God. So what does he want me to do with what he's given, what he's entrusted to me? Right? And he entrusts, maybe it's little.
Right.
But he's calling us to be faithful with the little. And then he says, I'll give you much.
Right.
But we have to prove our faithfulness to him.
Right.
So why should we limit our giving to 10%? If we're saving 15%, then that means our heart is going toward the 15% because the more is going there. And that for me was so convicting. And I looked at my spreadsheet and I said, how much am I saving versus how much am I giving? And I determined I'm not going to save any more than I'm giving. I want to give more than I save because that's where my heart goes. And I want my
That's a
heart to
challenge.
go to the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a
Absolutely.
challenge. It is a challenge.
Wow.
So,
Okay, circle back to the kids.
yes,
$10 for a 10-year-old.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going the long way around here. But yeah, absolutely. So to train your kids, so we have to do this ourselves because we receive our money. We are taxed on it when we receive it. So how do we get our kids to do that as soon as possible? Because the fact is, they are going to go out into the world one day. They're going to get their jobs, hopefully sooner rather than later, and become independent.
Yeah.
And so the sooner they know about this stuff and how their money is going to be treated, the better.
Yeah.
So if we give them an allowance, like the fact is we buy our kids and scripturally we buy our kids things a lot. So why don't we just give them the money and allow them to buy a lot of the things?
Like
Selves.
their clothes, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right,
Like,
right. Buying a bike.
a bike.
Right.
Right? So here's my thinking. If you were to give them, like if they're 10 years old, you give them $10 a week. Well, that's $40 to $50 a month that they're receiving. So that gives them a little bit of responsibility and it allows them to make some mistakes with that. So I go back to that pie chart and like, why not have a little fun with it? It's kind of my thinking. So it's live, give, owe, grow, and the owe tax and owe debt. Well, typically your kids are not going to have debt, right?
Yep.
Hopefully not. Why would they? They have no means of acquiring any debt at that stage. But they're living in your home. So what a great way to teach them tax. Okay, and you say to your child, we're going to give you $10 a week, and you give them $10 or you give them $9 instead of 10. And they say, well, I thought I was supposed to get $10.
Pay the tax, man.
Well, why not deduct 10% for tax?
I love it.
And it's just the reality of life sets in. There was a deduction.
Yes. So good.
Yeah. And then, okay, so for your giving, if that's your first priority and you teach this should be your first priority, so set aside 10% for giving. And let's say it's giving to God. Maybe they set aside another 5% for gifts. And I'm just using this.
Yeah.
I mean, they decide.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 5% for gifts for Christmas, for birthdays, and make them responsible that, okay, so for every other member of the family, they're responsible to buy a gift every year. I mean, what do you do for gifts for your kids? Like, do you buy the gifts so that everybody is represented?
Yeah, no, we get our kids gifts sometimes. Well, actually, our twins just had birthday in February, and one of the boys had saved up some money and wanted to buy a Lego set for his sister, so he did. But the other brother didn't have any money, so we bought another Lego set. We're like, this is from your other brother. We said, this is from him and this is from him, even though only one of them bought the Lego set, and he bought the other set.
So wouldn't it be so much more meaningful
Yes.
if with their allowance, they were responsible and you taught them to be responsible, to set aside that money,
Absolutely.
to give the gift, right?
It's so great.
Yeah, and that's some of that Brian covers in the book.
Yeah.
And, then it's the idea, okay, I want to give this certain gift and it's a little more expensive than budgeted. Okay, so what do we do in a case like that? Well, that creates such an opportunity for education and conversation around that whole topic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's simply because you said, okay, we're going to give them money and teach them to be responsible with that and divide up as they need to divide it. And Compass was always built on this envelope system.
Yeah.
Right? Where you had your giving, spending, and living.
Yeah.
Saving. So,
Yeah.
right? And you had these pots. So that's what I do with the pie diagrams.
Sure.
Live, give, owe, and grow.
So do you get pushback about giving your kids an allowance versus paying them, like tell them to get a job? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's that's a bit of a challenging one, and it's interesting how kids are so different, and some are naturally bent to work.
We were just
and
talking
go
to a
out-
dad about that.
Exactly.
They're all different.
Right? They're all different, and one is not as driven.
Yeah.
So I think there should be a certain amount of money that's given, but I think there also should be some incentive for them to do some work. And
Like extra stuff.
extra stuff around the house, right? And, there's certain things that should be required, and you're not necessarily paid for that. You're living in this house, you want to be responsible, and, I don't think you should get paid for cleaning up your room.
Right.
That should be
We all thought
a thing. Everybody has to do it. Maybe mowing the lawn, shoveling the driveway, those could be considered extra things, right? I mean, different chores, and I think for different families, there's different things that you could allot and say, okay, I'd love to have somebody even wash the car, for example.
Yeah.
And so give them some incentive then to actually work, and maybe they desire to make a larger purchase that's taking them beyond where their allowance allows.
It's an extra.
They need some extra. I think the number one thing for them to do would be to work for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So even creating those jobs and opportunities, and it helps to teach them.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And tax them.
Yes. And I think you said sometimes loan them some money too. Teach them about that. You want to buy the bike? You just mentioned a bike. They got $100. They need $150.
Yeah.
What does that conversation look like?
And I think that's a powerful way. This is something Brian doesn't talk about in the book.
I think it's a good idea, though.
This is kind of an idea that I had, kind of based on that pie chart, because how else are they going to learn about debt other than having it? And the reality is, most children want things that maybe what they're receiving in allowance, they cannot afford to get it, right?
Son wants an $800 drone.
There you go.
He bought a $300 drone from Costco. It broke. He bought another one. It broke. We were able to return them, but now he wants an $800 one that's better, but he doesn't have $800. So we're talking about, he's like, how can I get to $800? We're having that conversation. He wants it, but he doesn't have the money. He's 10 years old.
Right. So, I mean, there's an opportunity to actually, okay, maybe he has $200 or $300, I don't know, and there's a $500 gap. Well, what an opportunity to teach a lesson about borrowing. If you want this bad enough, then, okay, we will lend you the money. But that means there's another piece of the pie now that's brought into the equation, which is debt. And you don't want to overburden yourself with debt. The other thing I would say about that, it's interesting. The verse in Proverbs teaches the borrower becomes a slave to the lender.
Yes.
And I think there's a danger around debt, especially in families. And I didn't share this yesterday in the talk, but I think it's important. Because the dangerous thing is you can shift your relationship from parent to child to borrower and lender.
So your child becomes the slave to you as the lender.
Exactly.
Which is not what you want.
It is not what you want. So there is a teaching of, you want to train your children so they avoid the use of debt wherever possible. But you also, scripturally, it's laid out, if you owe money, there's an obligation to repay. So you get your child to borrow in this case, and they repay. But you have to watch that relationship, that if they fail, now in this case, they should not fail because they're receiving an allowance from you.
Right.
So it's just now they have to budget that allowance, so they cannot spend as much because some of that has to go to debt.
Paying back the debt.
And where people get in trouble in life is, okay, I can afford this payment. And, and cars are sold on that. It's not like it used to be. Cars are sold now. If you can afford the monthly payment or the biweekly payment, go for it.
Get it. Buy it.
Right? And that's the danger. You take on this payment, you take on that payment, and you end up overburdened.
Yes.
So teach your kids when they're at home that you don't want to get overburdened, and there might be a need. And I've seen situations in my life as an advisor where a parent has co-signed on a loan, and the Bible warns against that, right? Proverbs talks about that. And I've seen situations where the relationship of father to son was affected because the son defaulted on the loan.
Right.
And I felt that as well, right? Because I lent some money to my daughter, and it was for education. And it was beyond, I mean, we gave her so much through our RESPs.
Yeah.
When that was done, there was no more money.
Right.
And she still needed some more for education. We had an ability to pay. And I said, we'll do that. We're going to do that. And then after it's all said and done, you get your job, you start to repay. And she started to do that. And then she fell on challenging times, did not have the money to pay. And I began to feel this money is owed to me.
Mm.
And I began to, my thinking began to shift
Towards your daughter.
toward my daughter. And I felt this barrier in between.
Interesting.
And I thought about that verse.
Interesting.
My daughter has become a slave to me. I've become the borrower. She's become the borrower. I've become the lender. So it's creating that friction in the relationship of dad to daughter. That's dangerous.
Yes.
And I had to forgive the loan.
Yes.
I said, it's done. It's a gift.
Right.
And I let it go.
Right.
And it's important to let it go because the relationship with your children are what's most important. And you maintain that at all costs. After all, this is only money.
Right.
We're talking about. And the significant part is that we maintain a relationship with our children, because if not, we lose our influence with them. As that's something that God has given to each of us as parents, is the opportunity to influence our children. And ultimately, we are called to disciple them.
Yes.
And that extends, I mean, my children are now in their 30s.
Right.
And I feel I have no control in their lives.
Right.
Because they're adults.
Right.
They've grown. They make their own decisions. But every now and again, they will come to me and seek advice. They will seek counsel.
Okay, tell me that story of the lease. It's such a good story.
That is an interesting story because
Because you just said control. I don't know if you just said it now, but you said it earlier today, the influence, the relationship. I think you said you move your relationship from control to influence. That was the phrase I used.
correct.
Great phrase.
Yeah, because the reality is when our children are very young, we tend to have control. We have more control, and we need to have more control because they have none.
Yes, that's right.
But as they age, they learn to do things and they take control. The more they take control, the more we need to release it, and we become an influencer in their lives. So the story with my son and daughter-in-law, they purchased a car, or they were basically in the process of purchasing a car. And whenever our kids do something major like that, I'm the finance guy. I mean, I've been the financial advisor for years, so they reach out for advice.
I love that. Like, that is so, even if you weren't a financial advisor,
Right.
just the fact that your kids are reaching out to you to ask your advice about something,
Mm-hmm.
it's so healthy and so good.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
our kids coming to us,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad, like, you've done something right that your kids are doing that.
And I've worked at all costs to maintain relationships, because there are times in life when relationships are strained.
Yes.
And sometimes I've just had to hold back and weigh the cost of, because sometimes we want to be right.
Sometimes.
And yeah. And there's a price to be paid for that.
Right.
If we push the need to be right and the need for them to agree with us, because what I've learned, here's the other thing I've learned, and I'm kind of off track a little bit, but our kids grow up and they have opinions of their own.
Yeah.
And opinions that are different than ours. And I was like, how did that happen?
Where did that come from?
Right. But we can push so hard that we strain the relationship where our kids get cold toward us. It's not worth it to be right.
Right.
It's better to let it go, to maintain the relationship, because you have an opportunity to influence them.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just be quiet.
That's good. That works in marriage too.
It does work in marriage, absolutely. Yeah, and you kind of got to let go there as control sometimes as well.
All right, they called you about
They called me,
Because-
and I was working that day and in between appointments, and had a quick conversation, and they were about to lease a car. And it was my worst fear, because I was like, why would you lease a car? You have nothing at the end of the day. Your 3 years are done. You bring the car back. You have no value for what you paid. And anyway, I had to go into another meeting. And what I didn't realize is they were at the dealer. Oh, this is real time. Real time. It was happening. And I was in between my work day, and I was in small town Newfoundland where cell service was pretty spotty. I couldn't always get the messages on time to send back. And I think when I sent my final message, it was too late. They had actually leased the car. Now, I'm sure they had a period of time where they could have brought it back, but it was kind of one of those things like, okay, well, they're adults.
Yep.
They're making their own decision. If it's a mistake, they learn from it.
Live and learn. Yeah.
Live and learn. So we had some conversations about that in the following days, and they knew very clearly that, in my opinion, a lease was not a great idea. And so a couple of years went by, and they were coming to the point of bringing their vehicle back. And what I didn't realize is that they also used some wisdom in this, because they negotiated a very low payment on their lease. They bought a vehicle that was a base model, had none of the options at all to get the price as low as possible, which allowed them to save more money. And interestingly, when the time came back, and I actually searched online, and I do that a lot. I searched online to find them a car. I said, here, this might be a nice car for you.
Right.
And it was close to the $10,000 range. They had enough money to, they brought the car back, because it wasn't at the same dealer, but it was at the same, it was a Hyundai.
The same brand or whatever.
Same brand.
Right.
They brought it back, and they bought a car that was on the lot used for $10,000, included 4 winter tires, and they were all set. Now they had no payment.
Right.
The beautiful thing, a year or so after that, they were looking at qualifying for a mortgage. They were able to qualify for the mortgage because they had no car payments.
Okay, so they got rid of the lease.
So they got rid of the lease. They paid cash for the car outright. They had no car payment anymore, and still do not.
Right.
And that's, I think, at least 4 years ago now.
Great.
Still do not have a car payment, and is refusing to buy a new car.
Great.
Because what's there is working, and financially they are, again, in the accumulation phase, building up money so that when they buy another car, they will pay cash.
Pay cash for it.
So it's kind of a story of redemption.
It's a story of redemption. Now, how did you feel as a father when you found out they had leased the car?
I was upset, and I felt like in some respects, I felt like I failed. It was like, wow, like, this is not a good thing to do. And they knew that. I had expressed that, so they understood that, but they still did it. They still made that decision. So I had to come to a place where I recognized, okay, you are adults, and you have to make your own decision, and we have to kind of let this go. I had to kind of let this go. But the reason I say redemption is because I think so much good came out of that. And even when they went to get their mortgage, the mortgage broker was almost shocked.
Yeah.
They did have some student loans, but other than that, they had no other payments.
And he probably doesn't see that very often.
Correct. And and the broker was absolutely amazed.
Wow.
And they got an amazing rate.
I love it.
And when they went to the lawyer to sign up the mortgage documents, the lawyer said, "This is the lowest rate I have ever seen in my life."
Wow, that's so good.
It was 1.4 or something like that. So they got it right at the perfect time.
Yes.
What it's going to be on renewal is another story.
That's right. Well, they're up to a good start.
Yes.
That's great. Okay, let's wrap this up. If you're talking to young parents, if you're talking to parents, what's your top tip, top advice for parents, dealing with finances with their kids?
I think, some of the living by a budget can be so difficult and so challenging. And I've heard so many people come back and it's like, I can't handle a budget. Like, it's too complicated. So I would simplify the budget into that live, give, grow. and do it that way. So simplify it so it's not real complicated.
Yeah.
Categorize it, but also track where your money is going, and determine not where it's gone, but determine where it's going.
I think Dave Ramsey says, like, tell every dollar where to go.
Yeah.
Take the initiative on it. Active, not reactive.
Yes. And there are apps that you can get as well, and I certainly recommend the FaithFi app.
Yes, you said that. That's faith, like faith finance.
It's
Faith
yeah,
FI.
yeah, it's Faith FI, and I think it's faithfi.org,
Okay.
where you can go and actually get the app,
Sure.
and you can actually track your money, and you can categorize it according to live, give, owe, and grow.
Great.
Which is a neat way to do it, and it does connect. It's out of the U.S., but you can link your Canadian bank accounts to it.
Yep.
And so you can categorize it, and it automatically goes there. So I think, yeah, that advice of having the money and knowing where it's going.
Right.
That's the key, because many times at the end of the day, a lot of our money is gone, and we have no idea
to go.
where did it go.
That's good.
So track it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I've been sitting here with Lorne Robinson from Compass and Kingdom Advisors, and he gave us some great tips for parents, practical stuff like you can do this today. Give your kid $10, teach them how to break down, tax them, maybe charge them some interest if you're letting them borrow money. Hopefully you got something practical out of this. If you haven't subscribed yet to the YouTube channel, please do. Like it, give us a thumbs up. If you have financial questions, put them in the comments. I'm going to link Lorne's info in there, and you can connect with him if you have specific stuff. If you're listening on the podcast, please rate and review us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you're listening. And thank you so much. Thank you, Lorne, for being an intentional dad and really trying to teach your kids about this, and for making mistakes and feeling like a failure sometimes. It sounds like he's a great dad, but he's made mistakes, and we all make mistakes. Let's keep cultivating wisdom from our mistakes. Thanks so much, Lori.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, like it, share, review, do all the things you're supposed to do. We really appreciate it. We want to keep making great content and learning from our mistakes, getting wisdom. Thanks so much. See you next time.